I'm sure you're enjoying this shiurim a lot, and a huge thank you to Nashei Ubnois Chabad for organizing it, and to our speaker, Rabbi Hananya Hoffinger. And if you are enjoying, and if you would like to support these beautiful shiurim, please donate. And you can go on NasheiChabadCentral.org, and there is a donate button there. You can also send PayPal. So that would be really helpful, and that's another mitzvah, to add. And with that, I would like to present our speaker. Thank you so much, Rabbi Hananya Hoffinger. Please.
Hi, good evening. Welcome back, everyone. So we're going to continue with the class, or the classes on Hilchos Beis Habchira that we're learning now during the 3 weeks. And like in the previous evenings, we'll start with give me a moment, I just want to set it up again. We'll start with a sicha, and then we'll go into the presentation of the structure of the Beis Hamikdash. Again, a reminder, if you have any questions, there is a chat. You could write a question in the chat, and the Mitzvah Shem, I will get to it. On that note, somebody yesterday asked about the measurement of an amma. I didn't finish the complete research into it, but apparently there are variations in it, but all within 48 centimeters. That's the measurements that they would use. This is from Reb Chaim Noah in Europe, and 48 centimeters is 18.9 inches. It says over there that sometimes we add a centimeter, sometimes we take off a centimeter in order to be basically be more machmir. So if adding will make it a chumrah, then we add. If taking off will make it a chumrah, we take off. But the default regular one is 18.9 inches, and that's the measurements that we used for the Beis Habchira, for the presentation over here. Okay, so let's go back to where we were. So we had 3 different things over here. There's the reason we learn about the Beis Hamikdash, there's the history, and there's the structure. So we already completed the whole history. We went through that. We also started yesterday with the structure. We went through the Harabayas. And regarding the reason we learn about the Beis Hamikdash, so we had 3 sichas. So far we did 2 of them. We did number 2 and number 3. And today we'll get to number 1. So before we go into the first sicha, I'm going to read. We already read this once, but I'll read it again. These are actually very, very powerful words related to learning about Hilchos Beis Habchira specifically, not just about Mashiach in general. So these are the words that record a conversation between Hashem and Yecheskel. So just a little bit of history. Nebuchadnezzar came and conquered Yerushalayim 11 years before the Churban. And he took the king Yechanya, and he took him into Galus, and he brought with him, it basically says, the greatest of all of Klal Yisrael, the Ruchnistic leaders, and so to speak, the political leaders. He emptied Klal Yisrael of all of the great people, and along with him he took Yecheskel, Mordechai, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. One Navi he left over there was Yirmiyah, who was actually thrown into prison by Yechanya because Yirmiyah was saying the nevuah about the destruction, and Yechanya threw him into prison. Nebuchadnezzar freed him from prison and allowed him to stay in Eretz Yisrael. So Yecheskel was taken out of Eretz Yisrael 11 years before the Churban, and then 11 years later, it was less than 11 years. The Churban was 11 years later, but 9 years later, the next king after Yechanya, which was Tzidkiyahu, rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, and then Nebuchadnezzar came back and he conquered Yerushalayim and destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. So about 14 years after the destruction, I think that's the amount of years, 14 years, 25 years after Yecheskel is in Bavel, Hashem gives him a nevuah about the structure of the Beis Hamikdash. And so here we have Chazal recording for us a conversation between Hashem and Yecheskel regarding this nevuah. So Hashem's telling Yecheskel, tell the Yidden about the structure of the Beis Hamikdash, and he describes them the Beis Hamikdash. So Yecheskel says, are the Yidden able to do anything that you're telling them about what should be done? They're not able to do anything. They're in Galus right now. There is still another 58 years to the Galus. This is 12 years in, or 14 years in, we said. So there is another 56 years left to the Galus. Hiniach lehem, leave them be, until they get up from the Galus. They go up to Eretz Yisrael from this Galus in Paras, or in Bavel at the time. And then I'll go and tell them about this building that they have to build, the Beis Hamikdash. So Hashem responded to Yecheskel, and is it because my sons are in Gullus that Yehei Binyan Beisi Batul, that the building of my house should be batul, it should be canceled, it should not be happening? No, certainly not. And therefore you should tell them about it. And through that, as the Rebbe's medayik a number of times, it won't be Binyan Beisi Batul, but rather it'll be Binyan Beisi as being active. And Hashem continues, Amar le'HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Gadol Kriyasa b'Torah kibinyano. It says the reading in the Torah is as great as the building of it. Leich Emar lehem. Now go and tell them, V'yisasku likris tzuras habayis. They should occupy themselves by reading about the structure of the house, b'Torah in the Torah. U'b'schar kriyasa sheisasku likris ba, and in reward for the reading that they're going to occupy themselves reading it, ani maila aleim, I will consider it for them ki iluhim oiskim b'binyan habayis, as if they are occupying themselves in the building of the house. Now it's actually an interesting diuk. I didn't notice it till now. Hashem, it says over here, Emer lehem v'yisasku likris tzuras habayis b'Torah. The key word is b'Torah. It's not just reading about the bias. We know that, for example, it's brought down that the way that Tzitz is written, that it was Kodesh Lashem in 2 lines. And one of the Tanoim, I don't recall who it was, he says that I myself went to Rome, because the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed by the Romans. The people who led the Yidden during that time were the Tanoim. The Tanoim were basically the leaders throughout the entire second Beis Hamikdash. And then for another 120 years after its destruction, so 420 years of Bayesheni, we did this in the history, and another 120 years afterwards, he says, I myself was in Rome and I saw that it was written on 1 line. And the Mefarshim explain that whatever he saw, but we go by what the Kabbalah is. And the same thing is also said, as we know about the Menorah. There are various explanations given for why the Menorah in Shar Titus is rounded. There's various ways of understanding it, but ultimately the bottom line answer is we don't get our information from what we see a guy putting on an arch. We get our information from what Hashem writes in the Torah, basically from where the truth is given to us and where Hashem gives it to us. So it's interesting that we have over here Likros Tzuras Habayis b'Torah. So let's see, there's a sikh over here. It's actually being learned this week by Project Likros Zichus. It's an amazing project where people are learning too, or Chassidim are learning, and also outside of, so to speak, your regular Chabad Chassidim, others as well, are learning 2 or 3 sikhs a week. It started about 4 by Shnas HaShivim 3.5 years ago by Yud Shvat, and now they're already 30% maybe through Likut Sikhs. And this week they're actually learning 3 sikhs instead of 2. Typically it's 2 sikhs. This week it's 3. And this is one of the sikhs that talks about the learning about the Beis Hamikdash. And what's unique, let me just take off the screen share for a moment. Find where to do this. Give me another moment. I actually don't see where to do it. I wanted to stop sharing the screen. Or is the screen not even being shared? Okay, I didn't even realize the screen wasn't even being shared. Or was it? Could somebody write in the chat if the screen was being shared until now? If somebody could just comment over there. Or if somebody could take off their microphone. I'm not sure if somebody has that ability. Just let me know if the screen was being shared to now or if it wasn't. Okay. Screen was not shared. Okay. That's what happens sometimes with technology. I'm not even sure what I'm showing. Okay, so I'll share it now. And I'll go back a moment over here on the screen share. So I was just reading, you weren't able to see. I was just reading this thing over here. I was reading it out, the conversation. So I'm not going to do that all again. I'm glad I asked. But I'll stop for a moment to share. So what's unique about this sikha, we learned 2 sikhas already. The first sikha, the Rebbe spoke about how learning about these things, it's not Hilchos of the Mashiach. It's not for when Mashiach comes. It's relevant right now because in the next moment Mashiach's going to come. So this is something which is, you're going to walk into the Beis Hamikdash and you'll be familiar with it. You'll, in this case, now learning about the Beis Hamikdash, you'll know where the Lishkas HaNazirim is. You'll know where the Lishkas HaMatzayraim is. You'll know where the Lishkas, the Dira Eitzim is, the Beis Shmanya. You'll know the entrances to the Beis Hamikdash. You're about to talk to your friend. Which entrance did you come in? You have a cell phone. I came in from Shar Chulda. You're in Shar Kipenus. Okay, I know where to go. So it's relevant right now. In the second sikha, the Rebbe spoke about how really the darkness of Gullus, when we get to the core of what it really is, it's really a greater light. It's not that there's good and the opposite of good. There's only good and better. There's not a tzaddik and a rasha. There's a tzaddik and a Baal Tshuva. And so ultimately we're sitting in Gullus, but if we get to the real essence of what Gullus is actually higher than anything we had beforehand. And that's why Gullus will bring to the Geula. Bayis Rishon didn't bring to the Geula. Bayis Sheni didn't bring to the Geula. The Dara Midbar didn't bring to the Geula. What's going to bring to the Geula? The Gullus. Why is that? It's not just happenstance. It's because in Gullus is found this great light of the Geula. And that's why, like we mentioned already a number of times, the Mashiach that Rebbe said he envisioned from when he was a young child is such a Mashiach that when he arrives, we're going to say, not thank God for the Geula, not thank God that we're out of the Gullus, but thank God for all the hardships of the Gullus. How could that be, and why would that be? Because then we'll see the anaftabi for what it really is, which is not just the love of Hashem, but the ultimate love greater than any other love that exists. Like we mentioned from the Alter Rebbe and Tanya, that he says that the greatest expression of Hashem's love to a Yid, contrary to what many may think, is Gehenim, because Gehenim is the expression of a father, a great and lofty father, who's also a great and lofty king, who tells, because of his unbelievable love for his son, he does things that are irrational. What's this irrational thing? He puts aside everything that he's occupied with, and he goes to cleanse his child who has been sitting in feces and has filthied himself, dirtied himself. He goes to take care of him. So really that's an expression of the greatest love that exists. What's unique about this specific sikha is that in this sikha, the Rebbe is going to talk about the actual learning about the Beis HaMikdash right now. What is it in the learning of the Beis HaMikdash right now that's so great and so special? And what the Rebbe is going to essentially say over here is that it's the equivalent of building the Beis HaMikdash. Learning about the Beis HaMikdash, a person could say, I'm building the Beis HaMikdash. When Mashiach comes, Mirz Hashem, you'll have, so to speak, two people say, I'm building the Beis HaMikdash, and you'll see one of them building it and one sitting by a sefer. And you say, what do you mean? Why did you say you were building it? Because learning about the Beis HaMikdash is literally a mitzvah sasem and a Torah. And which mitzvah? The mitzvah of building the Beis HaMikdash. And it centers around this teaching of Yecheskel. I'll put it back on the screen now, or put it for the first time on the screen. Maybe I'll read it again really quickly, just that you could see it for yourselves. The visual of it could be sometimes helpful for some people. I know quickly is not so helpful, but I don't want to, we already read it once, so I don't want to take too much time with it. So, are they able to do anything? If the screen is not shared, please let me know. Are they able to build the Beis HaMikdash that I'm telling them about it? Leave them be until they go up from the Gullus, and then I'll tell them about it. And then I will go and tell them about it. Hashem said to him, and is it because my sons are in Gullus? Should the building of my house stop happening? It shouldn't stop happening. And therefore, Hashem said to him, its reading in the Torah is great, just like its building. Leich and Marlahem, go and tell them, let them occupy themselves by reading about the structure of the house, but Torah in the Torah. Ubeschar kriyasa, the Rebbe is going to talk about why it uses the word ubeschar. We're saying it's the actual building. How come it says in the reward? It sounds like it's not it, it's just the reward for it. Ubeschar kriyasa, she's asked the likrisba that they're going to occupy themselves reading about it. Ani maila aleim, I will consider it for them ki'ilu. The Rebbe will talk about this as well. It says over here, it's only as if. Ki'ilu, as if him oiskim bebinyan abayis, as if they're occupying themselves in the building of the house. So let's learn that sikha inside. Like I said, it's a sikha with the sikhas chelik yudches. It's the very last sikha of the sefer Masei Bein HaMetzarim. You can actually listen to the audio of the sikha because it was in Tafshin Lametes, and in Tafshin Lametes, the Rebbe from after the heart attack in Tafshin Lametes, the Farbrengens would happen on Motzei Shabbos, and so they were taped. So this is in Tafshin Lametes, which also. There are, I think, 3 years that the entire year, the dates line up with our year, Tafshin Pei Gimel, and they are Yud Beis Lametes. I don't recall the other one. I think it's in the Mems. So Tafshin Lametes is perfectly aligned with our year. So everything the Rebbe is going to speak about is going to be exactly the way it is by our year. And this is the very last Sikha in Chelik Yudches and Likutei Sichos. Okay, so let's begin. So the very beginning of the Sikha, which we don't have over here because we have some snippets, is that the Rebbe points out that Parshas Masei always comes out by Chodesh Av. Either it's exactly on Rosh Chodesh Av, or it's a day after, or it's Shams Avarchim, like this year of Chodesh Av. And we know that whenever you read something in the Torah, it's connected to that time. Now, the connection between Masei and Chodesh Av is very, very obvious because in Parshas Masei, we're given the date of the passing of Aaron. Now, mind you, Aaron passed away in Parshas Chukas. So this is not really the time of Aaron's passing away. And also, We don't find the dates of other people when they passed away, like Moshe Rabbeinu and Miriam. But the date of Aaron passing away is mentioned, and not in the parsha where he passed away, but in this week's parsha. And what does it tell us? It was on the first day of Av. So clearly we see a connection between Maseh and Av. But the Rebbe says that's a sort of, it's not an inherent connection. It's not the idea of Av and the idea of the passing of Aaron and the parsha. The Rebbe says that even that actually also there is a connection, as Chazal tell us that Shkula, it is comparable and similar, the passing of tzaddikim, like the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. And in Av is the time of the destruction. So then the Rebbe continues, and that's where we're going to start. And the Rebbe now shows the similarity. That's still technical, but in what way are they similar? Why do Chazal say they're similar? So the Rebbe is going to explain their similarity. Kishem vi by yistalkus tzaddikim, just like by the passing of tzaddikim, gefintmen we find, as their seder anhaga is in tzvei ksavis, that the way a person behaves are in two opposite ends of the spectrum. What are the two opposite ways that a person experiences it or relates to it? So for an ein zayt darf demol zayin di anhaga fun boichum es abel. On one hand, there has to be the behavior of boichum es abel, of mourning, of crying, of zanavegin on the tzaddik's passing. Umi idach gisan on the other hand is there's man to learning from ma'asav v'teirasei v'avidasei asher ovad kol yimei chayev. It's actually a time for a person to learn and to follow in the footsteps of the tzaddik, and the purpose is in order to continue and to go in the path in the ways that he taught us. Then we can apply what Chazal tell us as is afu b'chaim, that if his offspring are alive, then he too is alive. We find a similar thing. It's not exactly the same. And another sikha of the Rebbe that it talks about that in Nigla, which focuses on the body feels pain, the body mourns. So it's called a stalkus, it's called a yom ptira, and there's an idea to fast. But Pnimis HaTorah calls the passing of a tzaddik, it calls it a hilula. A hilula means a wedding. A wedding basically is the coming together of the two greatest opposites. And in Ruchnis, the two greatest opposites are the neshama and the guf. So in Nigla, it sees it as a separation of the neshama and the body. And comes Chassidus, and in its typical fashion, tells you it's literally the opposite. That on the day of the passing of the tzaddik, he now could connect to the world much more than he was able to connect to it before. So in a similar vein, and this we also find in Allah itself, it says a person who doesn't mourn is cruel because the body does feel the pain. And on the other hand, the person who mourns too much is also an element of something inappropriate. It's brought down as well. This is brought in the Rambam actually, because then the person is not really present for what's happening here, which is that the neshama is still alive. So now carrying it over to a tzaddik, and the way the Rebbe is explaining it here, we have these two opposite things. On one hand, it's a time to cry and mourn, and on the other hand, it's a time to connect to the tzaddik. So in other words, a time to connect to his passing, so to speak, and the time to connect to his life, to his being alive, to his living. And similarly, we find al derech zeh, we're going to connect it now to Av, is been a getzim zman from Korban Beis Hamikdash. This is also similarly true regarding the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Mitzad echad, on one hand, is demol ter chiyuv al pi Torah, that then there is the chiyuv according to Torah. From misabel al Yerushalayim, a person has to mourn for Yerushalayim, and we do various things for that purpose. From der zweiter Seite, but on the other hand, is dafka bein hamitzarim. There's man was verlangt a his chaskus miyuchoda if nit a fallen beyush from Golos chas v'shalom. The whole year we have to uplift ourselves and strengthen ourselves not to fall in Golos. But the time that we do this in a greater way is actually specifically during that time of the bein hamitzarim. Wissen, knowing kasiyum v'chaysan afteris parshas Masei. What do we keep in mind during the 3 weeks? As me'ata karasli avi aluf. Basically, this is a pasuk it's in Yirmiyah that talks about the destruction. We read it in this week's Haftarah, and it mentions over there that there will come a time that we call Hashem our Father, our leader, the one that's close to us, meaning that we will be reunited. The Rebbe says even more. A person has to encourage themselves and Yidden in general in the double darkness of Ikvus and the Shicha when they're too nach bebein hamitzarim. And in addition, not just in general in Golos, but in Bein HaMetzarim itself, when it's even more pronounced and more emphasized, when learning in Eisig Zayin, sich in Tzuras Abayis v'tchunasei u'mitzav u'muvav v'chol tzurasei v'skol chukesav. This is a pasuk in Yecheskel that it speaks about the description of the Beis Hamikdash. Was demot is doch k'maymer chazal, and then what happens? I'm going to explain a little bit more in a moment. So let me jump and explain a little bit. So we spoke by the passing was much more apparent, I think. By the passing, on one hand, there is the reality that there was the passing, and there is the pain, and that's why there is the boiche umisabel, the crying in mourning. And on the other hand, there is the ability to connect to the life of the tzaddik. These are two things that are simultaneously there. And the same is also true in Av. On one hand, in Av, there is the time of the mourning for Yerushalayim, and the various things that are in halacha connected to that. And on the other hand, when we learn about the Beis Hamikdash, that's what the Rebbe is going to point out over here. We are connecting to the building of the Beis Hamikdash. So on one hand, we're connecting to the destruction, the loss, and we're also connecting to the actual building. Not as something, a way to like comfort ourselves. In other words, we're missing this, let's somehow make up for it. But rather, we're missing this, but we also have something. It's not to make up for it. Just like by the tzaddik, we're not making up for it. They're two simultaneous realities. Both the tzaddik has passed away, and there's the pain associated with that, and both the tzaddik's ruchnis is here and present and can be connected to fully. And just like mazar b'chaim, af hu b'chaim. Sometimes it says it's even more than before, but now we're just going to show how they're the equivalent. And the same thing is true by the destruction. On one end, there is the destruction, there is the loss, there is the darkness, and on the other end, there is the actual, and we'll see how the Rebbe explains it in the Sikha, the actual building of the Beis Hamikdash that's accessible to us now. And so we during the month of Av is the time that we have both of them. As the Rebbe says, was demolt is doch. That's when it is that Kemaim Chazal, as Chazal tell us, when a person learns about the Beis Hamikdash, Amar leKadosh Baruch Hu Licheskel, Gadol Kriyasa Batera Kibinyana. Reading it in the Torah is as great as building it. So we're building the Beis Hamikdash when we learn about it. Leichem Marlehem. So now go and tell them. They're right now in Golus for 14 years. They're going to stay for another 56 years. Hashem says it's not a time to stop building. Go tell them these asku likris tzuras abayis v'Torah. Let them occupy themselves by reading about the structure of the house in the Torah. Obeschar kriyasa, and as a reward for their reading it, she is asku likris that they're going to occupy themselves by reading about it. Ani maila aleim, I will consider it for them ki'ilu him iskim bebinyan abayis, as if they are occupying themselves in the building of the house. So this is the start of the Sikha where the Rebbe shows this alignment. But the Rebbe is going to question that it would seem that we can't really compare what we have with the tzaddik to what we have with the Beis Hamikdash, because the tzaddik, as we know, his life is not a physical life; it's a ruchnistic life. The tzaddik, when you go to a tzaddik, you're not going to his right hand or to his left hand; you're going to him. Now, even though that's true by every person, you're not going to their body; you're going to them. But that person has been affected and is affected by their body. The body has an effect on who they are today. By the tzaddik, it has no effect on him whatsoever. He's completely beyond any of the constraints of the body. And so when a person is going to the tzaddik, they're going to their ruchnius. And that ruchnius is there in the same way, or maybe more even, but that's not the point here. But it's there in the same way and accessible in the same way after the tzaddik's passing as before. However, when we talk about the building, we're not talking about a spiritual building. We're talking about the Beis Hamikdash. It's a physical building. The building of the Beis Hamikdash is a physical building. So the Rebbe is going to question that it doesn't seem to align. And the Rebbe's answer is going to be that actually when you're reading about it, you have the same thing as when you're building it. So let's see. L'chaira, it would seem, Kemnen Fregen, seemingly you can ask, by a stalkos tzaddik, and by the passing of a tzaddik, is there lashon? Let's read the words. Ma zare b'chayim, af hu b'chayim. Just like the offspring or his students are alive, he too is alive. Unit ki ilu hu b'chayim. It's not as if he's alive, he is alive. As durch them, that through this, v'zare gate bedrachov, that his offspring, his students go in his path, vert oiv katan as hu b'chayim. It actually accomplishes, it creates a reality that hu b'chayim. And what's the explanation? How could it be? He passed away. Because the life of a tzaddik, as the Alter Rebbe tells us, einam chayim serum. They're not life of flesh. It's not physical life. That's not what the tzaddik is. Kim chayim ruchnim, but rather it's ruchnistic life. Is hu b'chayim. So therefore, if the person is connected to that ruchnis, so hu b'chayim is alive. Zayne embesa chayim ruchnim, his true life, which is the spiritual life, his ruchnistic life. It's literally without any qualifications, continuing also afterwards. But this is not so when it comes to occupying yourself by reading about the structure of the house. What are we referring to when we talk about Beis Hamikdash? We're talking about a physical Beis Hamikdash. Well, what defines a physical Beis Hamikdash? So makriv zayin dort karbanis gashmim, where you bring animals that are karbanis that are physical. The loikishachar Beis Hamikdash was tefillos b'makim karbanis tiknum. Not like now or then between the first and second Beis Hamikdash, where there was no longer karbanis, and in place now we have tefillos. In dibur and liman alal vasani maile aleim ki'ilu im oiskim b'binyan abayis, and the dibur and the learning that we're saying that Hashem says, I'll consider it for them as if they're actually building it when they learn about it, is das l'chayra nor kedibur atfilus. That's similar to karbanis and tefillah. It's in place of it, but it doesn't actually completely replace it, and it's not a full and complete substitute for it. It's, so to speak, we don't have this, so we're going to take something else. Not like by the tzaddik, where it's literally the same thing. Says the Rebbe, is this aber nitazay. This is not true. It's not the way it is. Why not? So the Rebbe is going to go through the explanation. Maybe we'll actually leave part of that for tomorrow or for the next class. I think it's next week, one day, Mirz Hashem. But first, the Rebbe is going to lay down the basics. When Teres Emes vergleich zwei Sachen, when Teres Emes compares two things, it says this is like this. Like in our case over here, as durch limud and tziras abayis, that through the learning and the structure of the house is animaila aleim kilu him oiskim bebinyan abayis. Hashem is like doing something over here. I'm going to consider it for them as if they're actually building the house. Is das der was beemes zainen zein zach? It's not a happenstance. It's not, this will be instead. I'm going to consider this as if it's this. It's because they really are one. They really are one thing. Norvibald. So then why does it say ki'ilu? It's only because since the results of doing it physically, it only comes out later. So the person is occupied on it. It's almost like maybe when you're putting together tzitzis, it's not tzitzis till the last string is added. But the whole time you're making tzitzis. The whole time we're actually making it. It's just that over by the tzitzis, you have the physical tzitzis the whole time. Here, the physical part, only the manifestation of it physically is only later. But already right now, we're occupying ourselves with the building of the Beis Hamikdash. That's why it's gezokt. It's said mit lashon kilu with the terminology of kilu. However, also before this comes that up in Poel Mamish, it comes out in the physical way, like an hour discussion here. Before we're allowed to, we're not allowed to build a Beis Hamikdash now, and before we're able to, we're also probably not able to do it now. The Beis Hamikdash below here in Gashmis is this nit ba'ofen as their limud in tziras abayis chulu is blaze a zecher. It's not a zecher. It's not a way of commemorating it or anything similar to that. Some bin in Beis Hamikdash. Other or unoich as their eivishter git them zelben schar. Hashem is going to give the same reward. We are gitev bin in Beis Hamikdash. So, but they're not inherently the same thing. No. Nor durch dem eisig belimud is when eisig bebinyan habayis. Learning about it. When a person occupies themselves by learning the Beis Hamikdash, they're occupying themselves in building the Beis Hamikdash. And so we'll learn Mirz Hashem tomorrow how this is, but the Rebbe is putting down the basic groundwork, which is that when the Torah says if you do this, it's like this, it's not because Hashem is just replacing it with something else. It's because they're really one and the same. Just to bring out a way that we could see this a little bit briefly, we know that it says that because Avram Avinu said, "Va'anochi offer ve'efer," I am dust and ashes. Hashem gave the Yidden the mitzvahs of offer saita and efer paraduma. And without getting into all the details, but the Rebbe explains, obviously, it's not stam as they offer afer. There's obviously a deeper connection between them. And what is the deeper connection? So offer afer basically expresses absolute bittul, that he didn't feel himself whatsoever. So Hashem gave those mitzvahs that have that idea in them to Yidden, that Yidden could also have this. Where do you see bittul and offer and afer? So by the afer of the paraduma, like we learned recently in Parshas Chukas, we see absolute dedication of one Yid to another Yid. One Yid is a tmei meis, which is the highest, the most severe level of tumah. It's meis. There's no chayim of the Eibishter. Let me stop the sharing for a moment. There's no chayim of the Eibishter. He's a tmei meis, and another Yid makes himself tamei in order to help that other Yid. And that comes from complete bittul, and also offer saita. You have someone who didn't behave properly, and Hashem takes his holy name, and the whole purpose of writing the name is in order to help that person, to bring shalom between two people. So there's obviously a deeper connection, and it's not just the names offer and afer and afer. And so too over here, when we say it's ki'ilu, it doesn't mean ki'ilu Hashem is making it as if we're going to reward us the same way, but rather they're one and the same. And the reason the lashon ki'ilu is being used over here is only because the physical manifestation of it is not seen right away. So we'll leave the explanation in the Sikha of Mirz Hashem for the next class. Let me go back to sharing the screen. And now we'll go back to the other part of the presentation where we learn about the structure. Okay, so we got last time we went through the Harabais. So it's going to go through that. I didn't set up the presentation to jump straight to that point. So let me just go through it very quickly. We already learned about the Harabais. We spoke about the Azara, its general location. We spoke about the entrances into the Harabais. There was entrances on each side. The main entrance was down south where you have the most room. We spoke about the Bezdin that was located on the Harabayas. We spoke about the structure beneath the Harabayas in order to contain any tumah that was potentially underneath the Harabayas. And we spoke about the wall on top of Shar Shushan being lower. This is where we ended it. We showed the visual of the size of the Harabayas and also the Harabayas, Mitzvah Shem, when Mashiach comes. Now we're going to move on to the Ezras Noshim. So now we're getting much more into the actual structure and the details of the Beis HaMikdash. So right away you see, when you're looking at the Ezras Noshim, so before anything, there were steps leading to the Ezras Noshim. There were 12 steps. Each step was a half a amma by a half a amma. So 12 steps, each a half a amma high, means that the Ezras Noshim was 6 ammas higher than the Harabayas. And what what these steps represent is that the Kedusha is getting higher and higher. As we'll see, every time you go from one section of the Beis HaMikdash to another section, generally speaking, there are steps, and the steps basically signify and symbolize that the Kedusha is higher. There's a sikha, maybe we'll learn it when we get to the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, explaining why there are no steps from the Kodesh to Kodesh HaKadoshim. Because as many steps as you make, you're really defining how high it is. And the Kodesh HaKadoshim is on an entirely different level, and it can't be measured with a certain amount of steps. So in front of the entrance of the Ezras Noshim, there were 12 steps. Now we come into the Ezras Noshim, you hear the name right away, it's called the Ezras Noshim. So the reason for that is because there was an upper level porch going along the sides over here where the woman would stand. And it says that this was considered a tikkun gadol. They made it by the, one second. They made it by the Simchas Beis HaSheva. Actually, some of Farshim say that it was only there by Simchas Beis HaSheva. By Simchas Beis HaSheva, where there was tremendous joy, which could lead to problems in Snias. So there they had the Ezras Noshim built. Some say they built it from scratch every year. Others say they kept the posts in place, but then they built like they put by the Rebbe, the bleachers, they put up the wooden part afterwards. But in the Rambam, it seems, he describes the Ezras Noshim. He says simply that there was a porch over there, seeming as if it's constantly there. So that's why it was also given the name Ezras Noshim, because of this porch that was built. Now you can see right away that the way it's structured, there are these chambers on the corners. So you'd walk in here, and then you have these chambers on each of the corners. So before we go actually to the chambers, so somebody's asking over here, is there a significance to the 12 steps? So I would say two things. Number one is for sure, because even when the leaf turns over, it's b'hashgacha pratis. So certainly the significance. In terms of what that significance is, I haven't seen. I was actually wondering, because we have 12 and then later we have 15. So maybe if I see something about it, I'll see if I could find something on it. I'll share it in another class. But I would say generally, for sure, the significance, the question is what it is. And that applies, that's something good to keep in mind in general. While learning about the Beis HaMikdash, later we're going to learn about the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, and the Heichel, and the structure of the Heichel is very, very interesting with all these chambers. There's 38 chambers. It's like in a catacomb, the way it's built. You have this huge Heichel of 100 amas, and the building inside of it is only 20. And it's surrounded by all these interesting things. Obviously, that symbolizes and signifies something Baruchnius. And then there's the physical purpose of it. An important thing in general to keep in mind. Just like it is even with among people, right? Somebody smiles, you know that there's a happiness. It's a physical expression of a feeling. So kol shekem v'kal v'chemer, when we're talking about that, it's an expression when we're talking about a Beis HaMikdash and the world being created by Hashem. So now the size of the Ezras Noshim was 135 amas by 135 amas. Is an exact square. It's about 212, is it 210, 215 feet squared. We'll see soon a representation of what that looks like in terms of being able to imagine it. And regarding the 4 chambers, so they were each 40 amas by 40 amas, which is around 63, again, 60, 65, 63 feet by 63 feet. Now, what purpose did these rooms serve? So over here, this is basically, you can see this is south, down south. So the southeastern one, when you come in, the one to the left is called the Lishkas HaNazirim. And this is where the Nazirim would cook their carbon shlomim and cut their hair. I mentioned this yesterday, but very often we read things in the Chumash and we don't notice any significance and meaning to it. If it would have said something else, it would also be fine. I'm talking specifically when it comes to karbonis, or especially when it comes to karbonis. So, for example, I'm not going to get into great detail of this about right now, but when it comes to the spilling of the blood, which is really the expression of the dedication to Hashem, right? Because the whole Beis HaMikdash, the main avodah we've learned already in one of the classes is the karbonis. Why? What's the significance of karbonis? Why is there such an emphasis on karbonis? Because karbonis capture the whole idea of a dir b'tachtenim. They take something physical and you bring the Eibishter into it. By a carbon, you see a full physical animal, and then it's gone. It's gone because you did a mitzvah. So it turns from the physical, so to speak, to the spiritual. So when it comes within the karbanis itself, a very central part is the sprinkling or the pouring of the blood. And if you look at it in the Zel Mekayim, if you say it in the morning, you'll see how it goes from the higher karbanis to the lower karbanis, where the blood is being poured and how it's being poured. And the details, literally, you see how it's going from one level to the next. So the highest level, you use your finger to sprinkle inside by the Kodesh HaKadoshim or outside by the Kodesh, but in the area of the Kodesh HaKadoshim with a finger. The next one is that a person is using their finger, but they're not sprinkling. They're placing on every corner of the Mizbeach, on the top part of the Mizbeach. The next level is no longer a finger, it's a cup. And it's not on every corner, it's on 2 corners. And it's not on the top, it's on the bottom. And then the next level is the pouring on the corner, on 1 corner alone, not on 2 corners that are basically 4. So you see it starts with a finger sprinkling, then a finger placing, then a cup throwing, which is like a finger sprinkling, but now with a cup, and then a cup pouring, which is like placing. And these are themes that you literally see throughout a lot of the Torah when it talks about karbanis, but you have to be aware of it to be able to notice it. So for example, over here by the Lishkas and Nazirim, that's how it's coming up, is by the carbon shlomim of a nazir. So generally, your, so to speak, default carbon is, let's say, a carbon chatos. In what regard is it default? That the participants in benefiting from it are the Mizbeach and the Kehanim. Both the Mizbeach consumes a part of the carbon, and the Kehanim consume a part of the carbon. Then you have an oila, which is fully consumed by the Mizbeach. When we say fully, we're referring to the flesh, the meat. The skins were given to the Kehanim. And then you have a shlomim, which is not just the Kehanim and the Mizbeach, but it's also the owners. So it's like shalom, it brings peace because everybody participates. But one of the interesting things by the carbon shlomim of the Nazir is that there was a certain portion that was given to the Kohen that's not typically given, and it was given cooked. So they had a lishkas on the Nazirim. The Nazirim would go there, they would cook their carbon shlamim, and they would give part of the cook. They'd come back and give it to the Kohen. And it's a pasuk in Torah that says that they're cutting after the Naziris was actually burnt in the fire beneath the pot where the carbon was being cooked. So we have over there the lishkas on Nazirim, where they would cook their carbon shlamim and cut their hair, and they would burn their hair tachas hadud, under the pot. Then on the top right corner, in the northeastern corner, we have the lishkas dira eitzim. So this is where kehanim who were bali mum, they had blemishes, whatever it may have been, that didn't allow them to do the regular avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. So they would go over here. They had the opportunity to participate in the going ons in the Beis Hamikdash, and they would inspect the wood so the wood is properly dry, that there are no worms in it, because you have to use the very best, including from everything that's part of the carbon, as well as the wood included. And what they would do just afterwards is they would take the wood out of here. They're not going to carry it through here and through the center. It's more like a back door. They would take it out from here, the front door. It could be there's an exit actually up here. That's possible. A lot of these things are not told to us, either because it doesn't really, so to speak, whatever that means, matter. Meaning, in other words, it's left to the decision of those involved. It's not specifically halacha, even though, of course, everything is precise in Vashgacha Pratis, or because it is written somewhere and you need to find where it's written. But it's possible there's actually a door, just occurring to me now, that would go out to the Har Bayis, so they don't have to bring it into the Ezras Nashim. They would basically then go around here and they would enter. There was a special gate called Shar HaDelek, the gate of the fuel, which is the wood is the fuel, and they would bring it into the Azar. We'll see that later on. See, there's a question here. I'm not sure what's written here. So if you could I see there's a message here written, so if anybody else or if the person could write it again, I'm not sure if there's a typo there. Okay, let's continue. So that's where we have the Lishkas Dira Eitzim. Then on the top left corner, which is northwest, we have the Lishkas HaMitzrayim. So this is where the Mitzrayim, so you have a Mitzrayim is basically the most severe type of tumah that there is. He's mechutz l'shalosh machanas. He's completely removed from all the camps. Somebody's asking over here if anybody can confirm that they don't hear the sound. It could be it's just theirs. I'm assuming it's just them because nobody commented. It would have to be something on their device. Okay, so we have the Lishkas HaMitzrayim. So the Mitzrayim basically is the most severe level of tumah. Even though we spoke earlier about the Tmei Meis, one of the differences, like everything, there's always overlap. So in one way, this is more severe. In another way, this is more severe. The severity of the Tmei Meis is it's Mesa, it's Misa, it's the opposite of Chaim. The severity of a Mitzera is that the Tumah is what's called as Yetzim Megufay. The Tmei Meis touched the dead person, but the Mitzera himself has the Tumah. So Mitzvah sent out of all three camps, in terms of in the Mishkan, what that meant in the Midbar, not just Machane Shechina, which is the Mishkan, not just Machane Levio, which is where the Levium surrounding the Mishkan were, but also Machane Yisrael. You had to leave that entirely. What that means in terms of Yerushalayim, not just the Azara, which is after the Ezus Nashim over here, not just the Harabayas, which is Machane Levia, corresponds to Machane Levia, but even the entirety of Yerushalayim. So this Mitzvah had such a high level of Tumah, and he would have to go through a purification process. And the last part was he has to bring a carbon. Now at this point he was fully tar. He's not coming into here otherwise. He's fully tar. However, because he had such a high level of Tumah, he wasn't paying attention to his Tumah in general during that time. So he became lax with it, or concerned that he became lax with it. And it's possible that by the time he's coming now for his carbon, he became contaminated with some type of tumah, which could be easily removed through tefillah, through immersion in a mikvah. So there was a mikvah over here, and he would basically, the last part of his kapara, they would bring the carbon here. He would stand in the doorway over here called Shar Nikoner, and he would stick his ear, his right thumb, and his right big toe into the azara to get the blood and oil sprinkled. I think the Alter Rebbe says in the Maimer in Likutei Torah that what this symbolizes is that by the Mitzvah, the Kedusha left him entirely. Now he's bringing it in first in his ear, which is connected to hearing and understanding, then into his hand, which is connected to the Midas, which is by the heart, and then even into his feet. So the Mitzvah would basically complete his Torah here. And then finally in the bottom, we have the Lishkas Beis Shmanya, where they would store the wine and oil. So there was wine by the Nisach HaYayin, and there's oil that was part of every carbon mincha, which is brought from flour. And just to conclude with a beautiful idea, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and just share this thing. It's amazing that I was telling someone, I would be amazed if it's written in a sikha from the Rebbe, but here it's written in a Gemara. It basically says in the Gemara that the Shar Nikoner, that gate where the Mitzvah stood in the gate and he stuck his body parts inside to the Azara. That gate was not given the Kedusha of the Azara. Typically, the gate that entered into somewhere, it's already part of that place. So the gates have the Kedusha of the inner area that they lead into. So the gate bringing you into the Ezus Nashim already has the Kedusha of the Ezus Nashim. The steps don't, but the gate does. The gate of Shar Nikoner says that the Gemara says this, was not given the Kedusha of the Azara. Why not? Because if it had the Kedusha of the Azara, then how is he going to be able to get the blood and oil sprinkled on him? He's gonna have to stand outside of the door. He won't be able to reach all the way into the Azara. So Taisus asks, why was that necessary? Why can he stand outside of the door and he won't be able to reach into the Azara? But he doesn't have to. Let him reach into the gate, into the section where the gate stands, because that area over there has the Kedusha of the Azara. So why didn't they just do that? Why do you have to take away the Kedusha from the main entrance of the Azara, remove its Kedusha for this purpose? It's unnecessary. So he says a phenomenal idea. He says the reason is because maybe when this is happening for this Mitzvah, who's the worst type of tumah, he's getting his purification, maybe it's going to be raining then. And everybody else is going to get wet, mind you. But this is what Tesa says. Maybe it's going to be raining then. And we don't want this person to stand under the sky. So for this person that went to what seems the worst place of tumah, there's no such thing by a yid, like we learned in Yom Yom just a few days ago. The churban is only in the buildings. There's no churban in the essence. And the essence is always whole and complete. This yid that went to the worst place of tumah is the Mitzvah, is Mechutz L'Machane, above the Yeshiv. He's coming now to get a Taira, and we changed the Kedusha of a central part of the Beis HaMikdash, Lo'elam V'ad, forever. For these few Mitzrayim that have tzaras, why? For the few moments where it may rain, that they shouldn't become wet. So this is a Tosfos in I think it's in Yevamis that says this idea. And we'll end with that, and we should taka b'zeicha to the Gula Mitzvah Shlema. We should have the Beis HaMikdash, and they should be able to make Shar Nikoner with the Kedusha of the Hazara, because not only won't there be a Churban in the foundation, but there won't be a Churban in any part of both the Beis HaMikdash and of a Yid, that there won't be any Tumah whatsoever. And Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow or I think it's Monday, hopefully ready be with by the Beis HaMikdash with the coming of Mashiach. But the next class will be continuing the Sikha, and then we'll continue with the Beis HaMikdash going into the Azara. Thank you everyone for joining, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening, best of your night, and a good Shabbos.
Rabbi, so there's one question in the chat.
Thank you. Let's see two things. Let's see what it is. Do we know if these chambers will be similarly located in Beis HaMikdash? Okay, so good question, very good questions. So actually in the various samples that are made, or the diagrams that are made of Baya Shlishi, it's completely different. So I have not delved into Bayis Shlishi. I tried a little bit this year. It was quite difficult. So for now, I held it off. Maybe it'll be the next project. But at any rate, this is primarily what we're talking about here is based, I think I mentioned in one of the earlier classes, on the Rambam Hilchos Beis Habchira, and we're incorporating where the Rambam doesn't mention or talk about something. For example, let's say there are 7 sharim, 7 gates leading into the Azar. It doesn't say their names, so the names will be brought from Mishnah Shnayis or the Perushim of the Mishnayis, the Rishonim like the Rosh and the Meiri, or the Achronim like the Tesis Yom Tov, the Ezer Yisrael, the Bartanura. So it's not where it will be in Bayis Shlishi, and I'm not sure where it will be though. Okay. Take care, everyone. Until next time, Mitzvah Hashem.